Hello friends, I wish you a very good day. Today we'll be discussing the Mansab Jagir system which was put into place by Akbar, alright, in the Mughal period. And the Mansab Jagir system came to be the defining element of the centralizing aspect of the Mughal empire, alright, and it was a unique invention in the sense that although some components of the Mansab Jagir system has been borrowed from earlier systems which had been prevalent, okay, in various parts of Central Asia, such as the system of numeric ranking and numeric assignment of numeric ranks and the assignment of numeric cavalry duties to officers in the army of Genghis Khan. There had been such systems in place during the Sultanate period also. Even if you look into Assam, you will find such numeric systems in which officers are accorded numeric ranks, and these numeric ranks determine the amount of people that they are in charge of, amount of officers or amount of army men that they are in charge of, okay. So Akbar borrowed certain elements. However, the thrust of the Mansab Jagir system in Akbar's period and the way he innovated upon it was that it was a centralizing system, its tendencies were centralizing, and it was meant to be, you see, a balancing element in a centralizing state. It was to balance the various destabilizing elements within the state. Let us look into the Mansab Jagir system and let us look into, you see, how it came to become one of the most important systems within the Mughal administrative form. Okay, so if we proceed and look into the Mansabdari system, what we see is that Mansabdari system is a way in which Mughal nobility was accorded their salaries, their rank, and in certain cases also the responsibility. Okay, and by responsibility we mean that every Mansabdar was designated a particular number because he was expected to raise that number in you see, horses and horsemen. Okay, so a Mughal Mansabdar was responsible to maintain a certain number of horses and a certain number of horsemen, and this was so because a Mughal empire was a centralized empire, and it required a standing army in order to maintain its own power. And also the Mughal empire at this point of time is an expansionist empire, okay, and it was predicated upon expansion, it was predicated upon the defense of its frontiers, and therefore every Mughal noble was expected to keep a certain amount of cavalry, okay, a certain amount of cavalry, and help the Mughal Badshah whenever required, okay. So this was the system that was put in place, and there are certain very unique elements to this system. The Mughal Mansabdari ranks were in decimal forms, okay. So a Mughal Mansabdar could be of a 10 rank, he could be of 20 rank and 30 rank and so on and so forth. However, he could not be 11, okay, 12. These kind of ranks don't exist, okay. And Mughal Mansabdars were according to their rank, they were classified into categories. So we see that Mansabdars from ranks, 100 to 500 were categorized as generic Mansabdars, but those from 500 to 2500 were known as amirs, okay. Amirs, which in Islamic term will mean a leader, okay. And then we have got the superlative leaders, okay, leaders of superlative qualities, and these were accorded Mansab ranks in accordance to their own position within the Mughal nobility. These were Mansabdars from 2500 to 5000, okay, and these Mansabdars were generally known as Amir-e-Umrah, okay, a superlative category of Mansabdars, right. However, even though Mansab ranks were accorded from only 10 to 5000 for generic nobles, okay, for nobles of the empire there were certain exceptions of Mansabdars who could attain ranks even higher than 5000, okay. Such exemptions are were made for Mirza Aziz Koka, the son of Atka Khan, okay, one of Akbar's wazir and a very trusted and capable minister of Akbar. Mirza Aziz Koka was accorded a rank which was higher than 5000, and then of course there was the trusted general of Akbar, Raja Man Singh, who was also accorded a Mansab rank which was higher than 5,000, and this was a very you see exclusive honor bestowed upon people who have conferred very exclusive services to the Mughal emperor. Alright, so this kind of system persisted, and this kind of system was buttressed. Okay, this system of maintaining horses and horsemen in accordance to your Mansab rank. So suppose you have a rank of 100, so you are expected to maintain 100 horses. Okay, you have a rank of 500, you are expected to maintain 500 horses and also 500 cavalrymen. Alright, so this kind of system was also buttressed by a very important element of state, an element which previously Alauddin Khilji had put in place, and now this older element, the element of the dark system, okay, the dark system, that is the branding of horses, in order to keep a tab on the amount of horses and the quality of horses that your empire is maintaining. Okay, the dark system which was put into place by Alauddin Khilji is now used in order to ascertain if the Mansabdars are maintaining the accorded Mansab ranks in horses and horsemen. Okay, so the Mansabdars were now supervised through the dark system, and by 1580s this system became regularized within the entire Mughal empire. However, there are certain elements within the Mansabdari itself who do not like this kind of impositions upon themselves, okay, who does not like or who cannot or are incapable of following these instructions, and therefore in 1580s when the dark system is put in place, we see that there is a rebellion in Bengal and Bihar, and this rebellion is also supported by the ulema, because situation has been compounded. Not just the nobility has come under pressure because of Akbar's innovation, because of Akbar's religious policy, even the religious part of society, that is that is represented by the ulema, the clerical classes of Muslim society, they are also feeling the pinch, and therefore these ulema, they also support this rebellion of nobles in Bengal and Bihar. Among them Sheikh Abdul Nabi, and his name is famous for rebelling against Akbar, Sheikh Abdul Nabi, and he was the Sadr Sadur or the Qazi ul Quzzat, that is the highest rank among the ulemas, okay, the state rank given to the head cleric of the ulemas, the Sadr Sadur or the Qazi ul Quzzat. In another video we have talked about these ranking systems within Akbar's administration, the various categories of officers that were part of Akbar's administration. So you will find a description of who the Sadr Sadur was. So this Sheikh Abdul Nabi, who was the Sadr Sadur, he also rebelled, okay, he also saw his power declining, okay, and he also joined this rebellion. And however, this rebellion was completely crushed by Akbar. Alright, he had a strong army backing and he had very trusted and capable generals at his side, and this rebellion was easily crushed. The ulema, the sections of the ulema who had rebelled, they also received very severe punishments such as drowning in the river Yamuna, to be certain. Okay, so after recording such punishment, Akbar, however, does not stop there. He realizes that the system needs a certain change, okay, and the change that was brought about was in the form of the Zat Sawar ranking system. Sawar, of course, is clear to you, it's a rider, alright, it's the rider, it denotes the rider, and Zat, by Zat we mean the rank. So a dichotomy was made between the rank and the and the Sawar that one has to maintain. So if you have been accorded a rank of 10, and if you are maintaining a number of Sawar which is less than half, suppose you are maintaining 3, okay, you fall under the third category, alright, you fall under the third category. If you are accorded a rank of 10, you are maintaining half of the number of horses, you fall under the second category. However, if you are if you have been accorded 10 rank and you are maintaining more than half, suppose you are maintaining 9 horses, then you are on the first category of Mansabdar, okay. And one day if you come up with 10 horses at the Dag, at the imperial Dag which is conducted every year, so if you come with the requisite number of horses, then we see that you might be up for a promotion, alright. So this kind of system was put in place so that even the nobility does not feel the punch the pinch of you see such a system. Even the nobility does not feel it to be an imposition. All right. So according to the number of sawars and your rank, you will be accorded a salary. All right. So the salary would not just depend on you maintaining the requisite, okay, maintaining the perfect requisite which is required by the state, that is 10. If you have accorded, if you have been accorded a 10 rank, you should maintain 10 horses, otherwise you might be up for some kind of punishment. So that kind of system was done away with after this rebellion, and salary came to be computed upon the actual number of sawars that you are maintaining. All right. So we have talked about the organizational and structural aspect of the Mansabdari system, but then we are also maintaining the salary. Okay. We are also mentioning it time and again, the salary, salary, salary. Now let us look at how the salaries were accorded to these Mansabdars, and we will be doing it in the next part of this video. Well, let us now see about the salary aspects of the Mansab Jagir system. Okay. So through the Mansab system, we see that the organization of the army, organization of the nobility according of ranks to the nobility has been achieved. But what about their salaries? How are their salaries going to be dispersed? And this is being done exclusively through the Jagir element, okay, the Jagir section of this innovation. Okay. So by Jagir we mean a land grant, okay, a stately land grant, okay, which is made by the state. All right. And this land grant is made in lieu of salary. All right. And the salary comes from the revenue that is achieved, all right, or that is accrued from this land to the state. And however, there were such kind of land grants even before the Mughals. The sultans, Delhi sultans before the Mughals used to give away Ikta land grants to Iqtadars. Okay. The system was quite simple, and Ikta system, while in the very first phase was an ad hoc system of assigning Iktas during the reign of the, you see, more powerful of sultans such as Balban, Alauddin Khilji, Muhammad bin Tughlaq. We see that the Ikta system gets regularized, and the accounting of the Ikta system also gets regularized. But again during Firoz Shah Tughlaq's reign, we see the third phase of the development of the Ikta system, and this phase sees a complete decentralization and deregularization of the Ikta system. That is not the case in the Mughal period. The Jagir land grants remain regularized land grants and only fall into, you see, only are able to drift apart through the decentralizing forces which are let loose by Aurangzeb's Deccan campaign and the later Mughals. Okay. But during the period of Akbar, it is a completely centralized system of giving land grants, and by centralization I mean that the Jagirdars don't have any administrative or don't have any kind of revenue you see collection authorities over the land grant that they had been given. They cannot collect revenue, nor can, if they have not been specified, if the job has not been specified to them, they cannot even administer their own you see Jagirs. Okay. It falls under the central purview, the administration and the revenue aspect, and these two aspects are some of the most important, you see, parts of a centralized monarchy. If you are a centralized monarch, this is these two things, that is the revenue administration and the general administration, you cannot give it away to anybody else, because it will break your centralized power. Okay. Because it will create other locus of loyalty, and people who will be living in the provinces, you see, they will be more loyal to the people who are, or the officers who are ruling them directly. Okay. So a centralizing empire, this kind it cannot do this kind of things, okay, giving away revenue and administrative responsibilities. At the same time, we also see that these Jagir land grants were transferable, and there were no hereditary rights over the Jagir land grants. Okay. So if you are a Mughal noble and you have been given a Jagir, it does not mean that you will hold the Jagir for the entirety of your life. You might be transferred to some other area, okay, and some other noble might be put in place. Okay. Even the Deccan, you see, not just the Deccan, even the Subedari of the Mughal Empire was not hereditary, all right, and it was transferable post. You become a Subedar of the Deccan, you might be changed, your Subedari might be changed, and you might be put in place in Lahore or Multan, all right, or you might be put in place in the various provinces of northern India. You might be put in Bengal also, you might be transferred. it creates an environment where loyalty of the officers that you are working with, if you are a noble, the officers that you are working with, then loyalty does not remain with you because you are transferable. Their loyalty remains with the Badshah, okay, and this was a very important element of the centralizing aspect of the Mughal empire, alright. So, from there on, we go forward and look into the specific salary element. As we already talked about, the salary is accrued, the salary is maintained through the revenue accrued from these Jagirs to the state, alright. Revenue is collected centrally and salary is also dispersed centrally, alright, in cash. It is not made in kind. This is very important. Monetization of the revenue is very important in order to maintain a centralized state, alright. You are not giving away revenue rights, you are not giving away things in kind, but you are giving away salaries in cash. So, Mughal Jagirdars, alright, Jagirdars or the holder of Jagirs, Mughal Jagirdars will receive their salaries in cash. The salary will be collected by the state, the central authority of the state, and that will be given to you in cash, alright. So, this is the exclusive element of the Mughal Jagirdari. However, the Mughal Jagirdari, as I have to stress that later on the Jagirdari also falls into the trap of decentralization, and it is during this time that we see that the Mughal empire is torn apart, and we will be talking about it more when we discuss the Deccan campaign of Aurangzeb and the resulting crisis that comes with the to the Mughal empire. And when we talk about the decline of the Mughal empire, the crisis of the Mansabdari and the Jagirdari system becomes very crucial, very important, and it is already there posted in another video when we talk about the decline of the Mughal empire. So, let us now for now focus exclusively on the Jagir system, and in the Jagir system we see two kinds of Jagirs, alright, and two kinds of Jagirdar. There are the Nakat Jagirs and there are the Watan Jagirs. Two kinds of Jagirs, alright. Nakat, of course, it's very clear to you, that means the regular Jagir out of which salary is paid in cash, the mechanism which I just explained to you. However, there is another element known as the Watan Jagirs. So, now if we look at such capable generals such as Raja Man Singh, will he receive a Nakat Jagir? No, he will receive a Watan Jagir. If we look at subjugated rulers who have come into alliance with Akbar after being subjugated, such as suppose Baz Bahadur, okay, Baz Bahadur, the ruler of Malwa, which was later made a Mansabdar in the Mughal court. Will these guys accept a system where they have no rights over the land that they are ruling or they have received as a Jagir? Perhaps not, okay. So, these people, that is subjugated ruler, Baz Bahadur, Man Singh, okay, rulers such as this, okay, the Raja of Amber, Baharmal, okay. So, these kind of people who were already hereditary rulers who had their territories and rulers who had come into alliance with Akbar, they are returned their same land, same land which they used to rule as Watan Jagirs, okay. So, the land that they rule has come under the purview of the Mughals, but the Mughals, rather than holding it centrally, they farm away the administrative and the revenue collection rights of this land. The administrative and the revenue collection rights of this land in the form of Watan Jagir. So, the Mughals are symbolically returning you the land which they had acquired from you after fighting you or after conducting an alliance with you. So, this is the system through which Watan Jagirs were given. And how does it differed from the Nakat Jagirs? It differed in as much as the rulers of these Jagirs, okay, such as people like Man Singh of these Jagirs, okay, who held this kind of Jagirs, they had administrative rights, they also had revenue rights over these lands, okay, and they used to rule it as they used to do before. However, now they understand that the Mughal ruler is supreme authority over them, because they are not ruling it as their own property, but they are ruling it as Mughal property in the form of Watan Jagirs. So, this in itself, you see all the elements of the Jagir system, and in the previous video we already talked about the Mansab system, alright. So, together they make up the Mansab Jagir system, and together they bring about a kind of centralization which was not seen before in India, and it is actually the backbone or the strength of the Mughal system of administration. It remains to be the strength of the Mughal system of administration. However, with time the Mughal empire, it seems, became so large, and the number of Mansabdars or the number of nobles within Mughal nobility ranks became so large that this system could not hold it together. Okay, there was not enough land to accord Jagir, and therefore there was infighting within the Mansabdaris, okay, or infighting within the Mansabdars, and this created a destabilizing situation. And lastly, we should also say that Akbar's thrust was to create a composite nobility. Composite nobility, okay. By composite nobility, we mean that no particular faction or no particular ethnicity or religion will be given preference. In fact, Akbar's nobility had both Shia and Sunni, and this had inherently to do with his religious religious policies, and that we talk about in a separate video, so you are welcome to look at it. Okay, so Shia and Sunnis were there. Okay, there were people like Iranis, Turanis. It correlates with their religious proclivities. Iranis will be Shias, Sunnis will be Turanis. Okay, then we have got Rajputs, and later on we also have Deccani nobles, and we also have Marathas. And although Aurangzeb followed a policy which was diametrically opposite to that of Akbar as far as religion is concerned, the Mansabdari ranks always reflect this heterogeneous characteristic. It even reflects this heterogeneous characteristic even in the time of Aurangzeb. The Mansab ranks always remain a composite form, so that no particular faction is given any form of preference. However, they form their own factions later on, and they become powerful enough to break away from the empire, and this happens because of the destabilization that comes into the empire in the later stages. Okay, so this in essence is the Mansabdari system and the Jagirdari system. I hope you found that video helpful. I hope that you will be studying hard. Thank you.